to our presentation. My name is Marilyn Smith. I'm the principal of Orchard Lake Elementary, and you are free to type in your questions as we go through the presentation, and we'll take a pause through a couple chunks in the presentation so that we can answer any questions.
My name is Stephanie Cass. I work in communications here with Lakeville Area Public Schools, and I'll be helping facilitate the webinar today.
All right, well, what I'd like to do is start out by telling you a little bit about how Impact Academy was developed. This is a program that was designed by teachers in Lakeville to better meet the needs of the learners they were experiencing in their classroom. And the design was worked on for several years. The model is intended to change the way we use time and school resources and space differently to better meet the needs of students. There are 4 components to Impact Academy, and we'll go into them in a little bit more depth, but I want to make sure you understand the 4 components. The first is personalized learning, and in that area we look to a multi-age model of teaching for literacy and math, as well as personalizing learning by trying to tap into kids' interests and passions around topics of interest in order to engage them fully. We also want students to engage in future-ready skill development. Those include the skills of problem solving, collaboration, communication, and creativity as much as possible. We've engaged a model of service learning so that we can have students connect content they're learning into the classroom with real-world problem solving and service to the community. And in the future, we'll be applying elective learning, which is a part of the program designed by teachers that has not been fully implemented yet. So one of the things you'll hear a lot about when we talk about Impact Academy is an Impact Academy community. So students in Impact Academy will be placed inside of a K-5 community of students and teachers learning together throughout their elementary experience. So there'll be 6 grade levels, K-5, and 6 teachers working with that group of students. Each community will include an anchor teacher. That's essentially a grade level teacher for each of the 6 grades, a special education teacher, a paraprofessional, what we're calling a support specialist, which is a teacher who can teach in reading and math, but who is also available to support service learning and other needs of the teaching community. And we'll also have an intervention tutor in place. Students will be assigned to anchor teachers in May in order to form the 3 K-5 communities, and parents will be notified of their assignment in the August timeframe. For those of you who have not been to Orchard Lake, I wanted to share with you the floor plan of the school so you get an understanding of the current space and where the additional 2 communities are going to be placed. As you notice on the map on the left, Impact Community A is the existing K-5 community. That space will remain largely unchanged for one of the communities. And then you can see that on the lower level, we'll also have a second community, Community B, along that lower hallway. And then the 3rd community will be located upstairs with comparable space to what is in Community B upstairs, and that is Community C. We do welcome families to come and visit the building and take a tour so that you can see the space as well. What is the vocabulary? Because this was designed by teachers, they wanted to rethink how they worked with students, and so they arranged and changed the vocabulary slightly. So you'll hear us talk about anchor teachers. Anchor teachers are when a teacher is with their typical grade level group. They start their day with those teachers. This is also the time when they would do science, social studies, or health with their grade level peers, and also go to specialist classes. When we think of a target teacher, we're talking about a teacher who's teaching literacy and math in a multi-age setting. And we'll get into how that is organized when we talk about how learning is personalized. Another term you might hear us use is support teachers. Support teachers are teachers who serve special education students, English as a second language, tutors, and interventionists. The Impact Academy model will be able to support all learners with these resources. Another term commonly used is specialist teachers. These are classes provided outside of the community to all students at Orchard Lake in the Impact Academy. Physical education, music, art, and STEAM class. STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math. These integrated learning experiences happen throughout the school year. And finally, a term you'll hear is integrated studies. And when we say integrated studies, we're looking at science, social studies, health, PE, technology standards that can be pulled together in a theme and are often connected to our service learning projects. All right, let's talk a little bit about how learning is personalized for students. The personalized approach for learning happens by making sure that students are experiencing what we call their just right learning level. So learning expectations are clearly defined by the Minnesota State Standards, and the learning communities are organized K-5. So if we have a second grade student who is a strong math student and is demonstrating that they can handle third grade learning targets, they are able to work at their third grade learning targets during that targeted time in math. If that same student is still working on some first grade reading targets and needs support that way, they're also allowed to move through their learning on a personalized level at that approach. The objective is to have students working at their just right level, not too easy so that they're not bored, and not too hard so they don't develop frustration. We are flex throughout the year to make sure that we're meeting students' needs. And as I mentioned earlier, it's really important to us that students also have an opportunity to explore their passions and their interests while they're learning content so that they can make it more relevant for them. A piece we layer in instructionally while doing that is using an inquiry model so that students really set a purpose for learning and feel like they can engage and connect to the content. So we have organized learning in Impact Academy along what we call pathways. And pathways are vertical continuums of learning based on the Minnesota State Standards from kindergarten to 6th grade. And those pathways allow us, they were developed in both literacy and math, they follow the state standards, and it allows us to organize learning into vertical pathways. For example, in math, there's a geometry pathway, a number sense pathway, an algebraic pathway, and then those standards are organized K6 so that students can be screened to determine what their learning level is, instructed at that level, and then allowed to be benchmarked to see if they've achieved those learning targets to move on to the next, what we call module. So a pathway is that vertical stream of learning K6. Those learning groups are called modules, and those modules are a set of learning targets that students work on. They're always screened and then benchmarked to make sure that they're progressing and that they've mastered the content before we move forward. And most modules take about 3 to 5 weeks to teach. This is a great visual to help understand the difference between an Impact Academy classroom and a traditional classroom. So what you see on the screen in front of you is a typical classroom experience that all of us experienced and that happens throughout elementary schools across the country. So students are organized by their chronological age, represented by the colors, and the shapes represent the different skills and abilities and achievement levels that they've attained at that time. So in any different classroom, there can be a wide range of students' needs that need to be met. What Impact does is reorganize students and systems to better personalize the learning and allow students to access their just right learning targets. So in this case, instead of organizing students by their grade level, we've organized students based on their module or the learning targets they need to work on. And now the shapes are all together, but they're in a multi-age setting for learning. At this point, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions we might be able to answer to help people feel clarified.
Great. So the first question we received was, why was the program created and for what population?
Great question. The program was created because teachers increasingly felt that today's classroom is diverse and changing, and that students come with a wide range of skills and abilities in any classroom. And for one teacher in isolation to meet the needs of those kids was really challenging. So that's why they took systems and time and resources and tried to create something that would be more flexible to meet the needs of kids. What was the second half of that?
And for what population?
Oh, and for what population? This is a program that we believe will meet the needs of all students. The current Impact Academy has students of all levels from our gifted program, learning English as a second language, as well as several of the special education categories, and supports an IEP within that model. So we really have not found a student that we haven't been able to adapt the program to and meet their needs.
Awesome. The next question is, what type of students learn better in this model versus traditional learning?
I think that we feel like the students that are currently in the model have a wide range of needs and interests, from being introverted to very extroverted. What we have found is that the model is flexible enough to allow for movement and student choice and voice in their learning, and that has tended to really empower them as learners. The other piece I'd say that we have found to be successful is that because students are at their just right level, they're feeling success. So for students who haven't felt success in school because it's always been too hard or it's always just beyond their reach, when they start to feel that sense of they've accomplished it, they've passed their benchmark, they're moving to the next module, that really changes the way they see themselves as a learner. And then for students who maybe felt like they already learned it or already knew the content, the flexibility for them to move along at their own pace and really have that personalized approach has really met their needs.
Great. The next question is this only for Orchard Lake Elementary students?
No, this program is available to all students in Lakeville Area Public Schools as well as outside of the Lakeville Area Public Schools process. It is by application. There's no qualification to attend Impact Academy. The random selection process closes on March 4th, next week, and the application is on the Orchard Lake website.
Another question we received is, how do you teach the curriculum for the individual learning levels if there are several students at varied levels?
So what happens in a community, so a community is a group of 6 teachers and say 150, 160 students. So students are given the screener by their anchor teacher, and that tells the teachers what module those students will be placed in. So instead of keeping all the 4th graders together or all the 1st graders together, they look at who passed module 3, and those are the students who would all be working at module 4, and they would work with the teacher teaching module 4.
Great. We have another question. Will there be more communication on how the children are progressing? I had trouble this year with my son. He had been in a grade above for math, and then one day, about 3 months later, I received a letter that he was going back to his grade level math. I feel like I had no discussion ahead of time or information at my school to help my son out in advance.
Yes, so how it works in Impact is that when the modules when the screener is given by the teachers, then the teachers send home what's called a parent report. It shows you what the learning targets are for all the modules K-5, and it shows you where your student is going to be placed, what module, and then what learning targets they'll be working on for that math experience. In our math pathways, students are moving every, say, 3 to 5 weeks, so they're not sitting within one module for a long period of time because they're focused on, say, a geometry or a number set. So if a student has a real strength in one area of math and maybe is just an average student in another area of math, we'll be able to flex to meet that need.
Another question we just received is, how does Impact Academy compare with gifted programs like Ignite?
Slightly differently in that in order to attend or be part of Ignite, you need to meet a certain test score criteria, and then you're invited to apply to be in Ignite. So for Impact Academy, we have no test criteria or any sort of benchmark that a student needs to meet to be part of the program. It's really designed for all learners. I think there's probably some parallels between Ignite and Impact in terms of the inquiry-based learning and some of the more project-oriented integrated approaches to the instruction, but there's not an academic requirement to participate.
So we've received a lot of questions, so I think we'll just have Marilyn keep going with her presentation. Some of these questions may be answered in the next 15 minutes, but we'll make sure we're answering all of your questions in this webinar, or we can email you afterwards.
Great. All right. In front of you, you've got kind of a typical student day. So we will be having 3 K-5 communities. So each community will have a very similar, they'll have all these chunks of the day. This is really a sample schedule for the school. So all classrooms will start out each morning with a morning meeting activity. That's typically done in their anchor teacher group or their grade level group, just the students and their anchor teacher. But they also will have 1 or 2 community meetings a week where the entire 150, 160 group of students would come together around some learning, maybe have a speaker, talk about their service learning project, celebrate their accomplishments. And that's a great time where you really see that multi-age mix of students. Then students would transition into their literacy block, and that literacy block would be done by their target teachers. So this is again a time where we've done a screener or a reading benchmark to determine students' reading levels, and then they're working with the correct text level and the correct standards that they are ready to handle with a target teacher, and this would be a multi-age setting of learning. Students in Impact Academy go to a multi-age lunch and recess break. Typically, K2 students go to lunch and then to recess, and 3-5 students go out to recess and then to lunch. When they return, we'll have math. Math is another time where they're with a target teacher, so they're taking a screener to determine what their just right learning targets are. They're moving to that teacher who's teaching those learning targets, and again, that can be a multi-age setting. All of the communities will have what we call a brain break. That's another recess time in the day that teachers supervise to give students some movement for the balance of their day. We will have an integrated studies block. This is a time when kids are primarily with their anchor teacher, learning their standards for social studies, science, or health. And then also this is the time where they go see those specialist teachers. That's PE, music, art, and STEAM class. And at the end of the day, they wrap up their day with their anchor teacher, get their backpacks, planners, all of those typical end of the day experiences. For you as parents, your primary contact for your student is your anchor teacher, and certainly target teachers are available to integrate and share information. So something to know about Impact Academy is that it's possible that your student would have up to 3 teachers in a day. They would have their anchor teacher. If they're working at a different level than their anchor teacher teaches for either literacy or math, they could have a different literacy teacher and a different math teacher. But many students inside of Impact Academy spend their whole day with their anchor teacher because their learning level is what their anchor teacher is teaching. But we have the flexibility to make sure kids can go where they need to be. Would like to highlight some of the student benefits that we've experienced so far. This is our 3rd year with our pilot program. And really, I think the teachers speak to this very strongly about how it changes your student as a learner. We really want kids to feel empowered and engaged in what they're doing, and to know that the work in front of them is doable work and challenging work that they can achieve and make a difference in their own learning. So we have students now who really, after 3 years in Impact, can really talk to their learning targets. When they take a screener, they can get a sense of whether or not this is a just right fit for them, and they will often express to their teacher, I know this is my just right module. I can tell because this learning target I was clear on, and these other 3, I don't feel like I'm strong enough to move on to a different module. So having students be able to talk about their learning and engage that way has been really an empowering experience for teachers to observe and for kids to feel like they can be in charge and change the outcome of what they're being asked to do as learners. One thing we haven't talked about is service learning, so I do want to kind of highlight that and give you an example of what service learning is. So service learning is intended to tap into those passions and interests that kids have and to give them a chance to develop empathy and generosity in their learning. So how we do that is it's a three-pronged approach connecting content, which would be science or social studies or health content, with kids' passions and interests, and connecting it to a community need so that they can build that foundation of civic responsibility. So I'll give you an example of a project that we just completed this year, or the first project of this year's learning outcomes. It was focused on health. The teachers looked at health standards K-5 and developed a series of content learning for each of their grade levels. And then across the community, students developed 2 driving questions about how to help people make healthier choices as a community and how to take ownership for your own health in what you eat and how you spend your time. And then students developed projects that they worked on. They made a fitness calendar, they wrote letters to the editor, they made TV commercials. Some kids redesigned the grocery store so that the healthier choices were more forward. They redesigned packaging of foods that were high in sugar content. And then we had a culminating activity of a service learning celebration where over 100 parents came to school to see what kids had done and be able to showcase what they had learned and share advice about what they had learned. And one of our students was published in the Sun Current paper, her letter to the editor that she completed. So we're really trying to provide authentic learning experiences for kids, and that's an example of what we do with service learning. Just to highlight how we kind of touched on this before, but I want to highlight how you have access to Impact Academy. Orchard Lake remains the neighborhood school for their attendance area, so there is no action required on your part if you're already an Orchard Lake family. If you are an Orchard Lake family and choose a more traditional model, you have 2 options. One option is to attend Christina Huddleston, and transportation will be provided. Open enrollment paperwork was due to Jenny Welter earlier in February. And option 2 is to use the intra-district enrollment process to other schools that have space. Transportation is not provided to other schools. And families outside of our attendance area will need to apply via the random selection process. So who needs to apply to Impact Academy is anyone in the Lakeville area schools who does not live in the Orchard Lake attendance area, and any families who are outside of the Lakeville area public schools would also need to apply. Details of the Impact Academy application process are on the Orchard Lake website. It's done by random selection. The process opened on January 26th, and as I said before, it closes on March 4th. We will conduct that random selection process the following week, and we will notify families of enrollment or waitlist status on March 11th. I want to thank you for your time. We are going to go back to if there's any other questions that we can answer, but I did want to share with you if you're interested and want to learn more, there are several ways you can do that. You could certainly visit our Orchard Lake website and look at the Impact Academy information there. We do tour the school on a regular basis. These dates and times are standing times that you can come, but if those times don't work for you, feel free to contact Jenny Welter, and her number is there. And at any time you can contact myself by email or by phone so that I can answer questions personally if you need them. And if you're interested in talking to some Impact parents who have had students in the model, certainly contacting me and letting me know that I can connect you with some parents who'd be happy to talk just parent to parent. Are there any other questions we might be able to answer that have come up?
Yeah, we've had quite a few. We have answered throughout the webinar to some that may have missed earlier that Marilyn mentioned, but one question we did get was, this seems to be similar to a Montessori. Is this sort of a hybrid between that and a traditional school?
I think the multi-age teaching is very similar to what you see in a Montessori program. It's not as open inquiry based. Montessori is a very unique instructional model, but the idea of just right learning and multi-age learning, and kind of letting kids feel empowered and connected is very similar.
Another question we got is, how does learning work with a high-functioning first grader, for example, and perhaps with a lower-functioning fourth or fifth grader?
Great question. We generally don't have let kids go quite that wide of a range. So, excuse me, if we have a first grader who's actually reading at our fourth or a fifth grade level, what we would likely do is put them in with the third grade learning targets, but make sure that the text they're using is at a slightly higher level than maybe those third grade readers. We want to be really aware of the needs of the learner, and a high reader matched with a reader who's struggling does not necessarily have the same instructional needs. So we really monitor that and make instructional decisions or placement decisions that will support kids socially and emotionally, and then make sure we adjust using appropriate text or other ways we can adjust.
Another question we received is, what are examples of service learning activities my child would be doing?
So I highlighted one. Other projects we've done is we did one around science and the water cycle and looked at all those standards, and then kids did some research about clean water around the planet, and they ended up doing projects and fundraising around, and were able to donate, I think it was almost 60 water filters to the organization we connected with in the Dominican Republic. Those projects really are organic. Teachers guide it and kind of develop what those standards are going to be, what that content learning is going to be, and then they try to help guide students to those questions and let it be developed by students. So it's hard to say, well, they would be doing this kind of project or that kind of project, because we really want student voice in that work.
Another question we received is, for an incoming kindergartner, how is initial placement determined?
Great question. If you have siblings, we would place siblings in the same community unless parents would prefer to be in different communities. And so likely we'll place any incoming kindergartners to Orchard Lake in the same community as any of their siblings, and then we look for gender balance within each of the K classrooms, but that's really kind of a random process when we first meet kindergartners.
We've had a lot of questions regarding transportation. The summary of all of them is transportation provided out of the OLE area?
If you are an Orchard Lake family and you choose not to continue to attend Orchard Lake, there's transportation to Christina Huddleston. If you are coming to Impact Academy, there is not transportation provided at this time. We will be trying to support families by coordinating or collecting and connecting all people from one school to see if some logical carpools can be set up, if that's helpful.
Another question is, what is the student to teacher ratio? How many students work with a teacher at a time?
Great question. We will follow the typical guidelines of Lakeville Public Schools in terms of class size for enrollment purposes. And typically when we're reorganizing students by the learning targets, we try to keep close to those targets so that kids are not in learning environments that are vastly larger than that size. So for example, second grade, the class size limit is 28. If it turns out that we have 29 students that can handle that learning level, we would probably leave it at that size. But if it turned out there were 35 or 36 at that level, then teachers look at the characteristics of those kids and try to make that a more manageable learning size.
We have a question about music and art. Are they an option for kids to leave, or if they're not interested in music and art?
Music and art are part of the program, so they would need to participate in those classes.
Another question is about testing. We've had a couple questions about how testing is done here at Impact Academy. Is it different than other Lakeville area schools?
Great question. All of the standardized testing that's done for the state or for Lakeville schools is also done inside of Impact Academy, so that would include the MAP test, the MCA test, for our younger students, our DRA screeners and reading screeners. So we use all that same data so that we can track students' progress and make sure that they're progressing. Our data so far indicates that students inside of Impact Academy are performing as well as students outside of the model. And really, our first group of kids who have only experienced from kindergarten on Impact Academy will be third graders next year. That'll be the first chance we'll have to see impact-only learners taking the MCA test. So we're excited to see that data come in.
Another question we've received from a couple folks is, how do we ensure a fifth grade student struggling or progressing is caught up to grade 5 to head into middle school?
Great question. Teachers monitor achievement very closely, and even though we are grouping students by their learning targets, so you might have a fifth grader still working on some fourth grade targets, we are very aware of what the end target is for them, and so intervention, tutoring, all that extra support that they would have in their traditional fifth grade classroom would also be available to them. We monitor that closely because we want to make sure kids are as ready as we possibly can for middle school. And we do feel like our older students who have been able to see themselves as successful at learning targets that might be lower than their grade are feeling empowered, like, I can do this. This is not an impossible task. Whereas in the past, I think their experience has been that they're constantly doing learning that's just out of reach, and that builds a level of frustration, and they tend to shut down.
Another question we received is, my son will be in fifth grade next year. Does it make sense for him to go to Impact Academy for 1 year?
You know, last year was our first year. We had a group of fifth graders who came in because that was the first year we had added fifth grade, and they spent a year in the model. I think it helped some of those kids in 2 or 3 different ways. One was socially, they got a chance to be sort of leaders amongst the community, and that for those kids was a unique opportunity. The other thing is that they got a chance to work with different teachers. So even though they're all in the same open collaborative space, they might have worked with a couple of different teachers throughout the year, and that gave them a little bit of a sense of what that's like to work with different teachers, which is similar to what they'll experience in middle school. And then I think finally that organization piece, because kids are moving to different target teachers, they got to know where their stuff is and where they need to be and what they need to complete, and I think that mimics some of the experiences students will have in middle school. Our fifth graders who left felt excited about going to middle school and taking on that challenge last year.
An additional question we've received is, do you have before and after school programs like Kids Zone that are provided at other schools?
Yes, we will have before and after school care at Kids Zone here, as well as community education classes.
We have a lot of questions here, you guys, and we're reaching past 12:30, so we'll probably cut it off here. We will email you for the remaining questions that were sent to us, response from Marilyn or Stephanie. But thank you for attending today. This webinar will be recorded, and it will be available on the district website at isd194.org, and then just select Orchard Lake Elementary, and there's a whole impact section that we'll have this posted on. And any other questions, Marilyn's contact info is up here. She and her team can answer any other questions about Impact Academy, and thank you so much for attending.
Yes, thank you.